Hi everyone, it's Niamh here and welcome back to my art journaling channel. Today we're going to be looking at part 2 of our assemblage creation using the theme of Moulin Rouge. So here is the finished lights that my video cut out on while I was doing it, but you can see the shelf construction I was talking about. So I've got the marquee lights down the bottom, put the piece of paper over the top, foam board over the top, and then inserted the lights up through to create these up lights. I've also used a hot glue gun to glue everything down. I find that was a lot easier than trying to hold together with wet glue while it dried. So hot glue is almost instantaneous. In the background now, all I'm doing is sticking down my base paper, so the text and the map and the picture of the man with his top hat. And at this stage now, all I'm doing is just lying different bits and pieces down, trying to find where I want to put them. Obviously, it's much better to do this before gluing everything down because you've got the opportunity to move things around, see where you want things. Already I knew that the Moulin Rouge piece that I had, I wanted to tuck behind the picture of the man, so obviously I wasn't cutting off his head. Now, in the previous video, I talked about pulling out all the things that you think you're going to want to use and put it together in a box, and that's what you can see me going through to the side. You would think having everything organized into that box that I wanted to use would make it much easier to find, but I still lost bits that I knew I had in that box. So that just confirmed to me the fact that how useful it was actually having it there. In the background, you can see I'm just tinting up the paper. I'm just using the distress inks in frayed burlap and walnut, just to add some extra interest to the background. You'll also see on all the cut pieces I'm putting down, I'm using a really dark grey alcohol marker or a marker of some sort to hide those stark white edges that you get with cut pieces of paper or cardboard. That Moulin Rouge piece is actually a piece of cardboard. If I hadn't done that, you could see those white edges still. With the tickets, I wanted to raise those up slightly to start creating those layers. So I'm just using the foam board that I had before, the core board, to cut strips out to raise them up, and I'm just using double-sided tape to stick those onto the back. However, to glue down the lace, I found the best way to do that, except it dried really quickly, was to use the hot glue gun. Just held it really still, and it meant, again, I'm not waiting for wet media to dry, and it means I can continue to glue things on the top without the risk of it moving. Now I'm just going in with a bit of sandpaper, just low grit sandpaper, to go over the top, just to distress the images somewhat. As I was doing this, I realised that I'd put the image of the Arc de Triomphe up too high, and I needed to overlap it to get everything glued in, because that frame was a lot bigger than I actually thought it was going to be. So now I'm just going in with a pencil. I just need to snip off the edges of that picture just so that the frame sat down nice and snug onto the page. And I've raised, as I've gone, I've raised each layers up. So the tickets and the Arc de Triomphe were one layer up, the image of the Moulin Rouge were 2 layers up. So just playing with the different levels and just using that foam board to build things up. Having foam board, you can usually get it from an art supply shop. They're usually, even news agencies sell it. So it's really handy stuff to have. At the moment, what I'm trying to do is to put seed beads in a range of colours, in reds, blacks, whites, and I think there's a little bit of pink in there, into a small glass jar or a vial. And the reason I did that was because, again, sort of going with that theatre, fashion, icon type go with the Moulin Rouge theme, I wanted to have, because for me, the movie was all about the costuming as well as the music. I wanted to have some sort of link to that, you know, her beautiful costumes, the diamonds in the costumes and the heavily beaded stuff. I couldn't put that into the image that I had in the front, so I wanted to have some link to that within my assemblage. So I decided to do that in the little vial. You saw me use the black permanent marker just on the uplights that I had there. There was some bits of white foam that you could still see, so again I went back just to hide that white. The more you can hide where you've worked, the more put together your finished piece is going to look. So I'm using the Tim Holtz typeface blocks and just hot gluing them together to make 2 blocks, and going in with some of my acrylic paint to paint over the letters so they stand out somewhat. Now I'm painting over with the red acrylic paint. Red does tend to be a little bit transparent. Doesn't matter so much on the light letters, but it does on the darker letters. So I'll go back in with some white paint and also some gold just to highlight those letters a bit more and make them stand out. Again, that fits in with the colour theme that I was looking for, that black, red, gold, that rich colour. I don't mind that's gone sort of pinky because I knew that I was going to paint over it at the end as well. I didn't sand these letters. You could sand the letters and get a better grip on them, but to be honest, you don't really need to. You could also use ink on the top of that as well to colour it up, depending what colour ink you wanted. And you can see that it's going on really easily. The gold paint that I'm using is actually a golden paint, acrylic paint, fluid. I think it's one of their fluid range, and it's actually brass, but it makes the best gold paint. I don't quite understand that, but yeah, it's one of my favourites. I'm just using my craft knife to clean off any excess that's gone around the edge to try and keep it as clean as possible. To be honest, using a brush on that wasn't the best idea. You'll see me in a minute go back in with my fingers to finish colouring it up, and that was a lot easier in the end because I was able to get the flat surface of my finger to sponge on the paint. You could use a makeup sponge to do that as well. Just make sure you don't have much paint on your makeup sponge. So again, leaving those to one side to dry. Going back in, sorry, with some red paint. So it's sort of speckly, but you'll see the effect in the close-ups at the end. Okay. So again, to put these in, I kept turning on and off the lights as well because I wanted to see how the shadows played, and that's one thing that I really love about assemblage art, is that you get automatic shadows in what you're doing and drop shadows around where you're working. So to do this next piece, I'm going to have to build up the layers to make sure it's secure enough for the pieces to sit without falling over. So with the rouge, I had to use a larger bit on one end and a small bit to fit under where the Arc de Triomphe was. And with the Moulin, again, I'm going to have to build that up a few layers. So I think I ended up adding sort of 3 or 4 layers of tape, or of the foam board, and you can see that there. And you can see, again, I'm going around with a black marker just to hide it. In reality, probably no one's going to be looking that closely to see it, but if you did sort of tip it up and look down, you would be able to see the white. So it's just that finishing off, I think, that makes a piece look more professional and more finished than just slapping it all together. And if you're taking this amount of time to create something like this, you want it to look the best, I suppose. So with the man that I've got there, I think it took about 5 layers of board altogether to glue them up high enough to stand in front of the frame. And now I'm just using the hot glue to glue the pieces down. I'm not a great one for hot glue. I'm actually really surprised I used it in this process, but because I was under some time pressure to get this together, just for the fact that I've got 2 very small children and I have to do this in between sleeps. So this is going on sort of 11:30 at night, knowing my littlest bear was about to wake up for her last feed of the evening. So I was trying to get it done as quickly as possible. However, when you are doing assemblage art, it is really, really handy to have an adhesive that dries really, really quickly, because you are working in 3D. There is likelihood of things moving around and shifting, and once it does shift, it's very hard to move again without tearing background papers and so on. Those tickets, for example, you know, if I had to remove this man, I'm going to tear that paper before, because it's quite delicate paper. So that's why it's really important to have a go at putting everything in where you think you want it beforehand, and be really sure of your placement before you start gluing stuff down. So now what I'm doing with the little bottle, I just want to put some words on it to sort of tie it all in together instead of just having a bottle of beads there. So the words I chose from the tissue paper were, I think, held in memory, and I'm just using some Collage medium to glue that onto the bottle. The Collage medium will dry clear. It looks a bit cloudy at the moment, but it does dry clear. So again, just putting some hot glue onto that and putting it next to the man's legs. So again, going back, turning on the light, seeing how it's all working, seeing how it's all acting with each other, and gluing down the battery pack at the end. I do suggest, if you're doing this a project like this, make gluing the battery pack on the very last thing you do, because it just made it a bit hard to press things down. So with my clear transfer that I did for the front page, I wanted to bring in some of the words from the song, and one of my favourite songs from the movie is Come What May, and it was a song that both the lovers sang to each other to sort of remind each other that they were always going to be there. And I liked the connection, or it gave a connection between the men in the background and Satine out the front, that you could sort of look through. And I have to admit, I wasn't sure how stamping on this acetate would work, but because it's acetate to go through a laser printer and an inkjet printer, it does actually have a little bit of tooth, and it took the paint really, really well, and it dried really, really quickly. So it's definitely a technique that I will do again in future. I was really happy with how that came together. At this stage, you'll see me now again doing a lot of putting things down, taking it off, seeing how it's all working together, just to make sure that I'm really happy with how it's going. So now I'm just trimming down the image that I'm going to use, so I can stick it in the background. Again, the image of the woman with the moon came from James Burke Creative. He's got a giveaway going on at the moment on his YouTube, on his Instagram and his Facebook group, and he had the original image that you could download and do with whatever you wanted. So I took the image, and it was partially watercolored, but it was just done in blues. So I recolored it using watercolors, putting the reds, the shimmery paints in the background, and then scanned it into my computer, printed it out in the acetate, and that's the image that I'm now using. So the tape I'm putting on the inside is this red liner tape, double-sided sticky tape. It's amazing double-sided sticky tape, but it is very, very sticky, and it is ridiculously hard to get the backing off. I don't know if anyone else has got a trick for that. Please let me into it, because I have no nails and I have no way of doing it. So I end up getting a craft knife to peel off the top lining. So I've decided the black box is a bit too boring now. Now I've got everything else happening on the inside. So what I want to do is, with my gold paint, I'm just going to press my text stamp around the edge. Now it's not going to be perfect, and that's fine with me. I want that sort of beaten up vintagey type look. Again, I don't have this stamp on a block. I probably should, but I tend to not put my rubber stamps or my unmounted stamps on blocks. I do break that in a minute, because I do actually double-sided tape it down to a block, because I was having difficulty with printing it the way I wanted it to. If you don't have a really good gold ink, I suggest trying using paint. Some people are really funny about using paint on their stamps, but it is actually perfectly fine. It washes off. It's not going to hurt your rubber or your clear stamps. I think this is where I stick it onto the blocks. I just use some double-sided tape, and the reason for that is because the area that I'm trying to stamp on is so fine, it just needed that little bit of extra support to press it down. Because the stamp is so large, it was really hard to try and get an even stamping image over the whole top. So this is my use it up journal. Any paints I have or leftovers or cleaning off my brayers, I just do this into my use it up journal, and it gives me a good background for another page further on down the track. That is one of my stamping blocks, but I tend to use it as a palette. So if you've got a palette, that's probably the best way to do it. So I really like the box as is, just like that. And that gives you obviously a very clear image of what you're going to do. When you buy this box from Tim Holtz, it actually does have a piece of acetate to fit into that window, so you don't actually need to do anything else. You could just have it totally enclosed and it could sit on your shelf like that. Obviously I wanted to have that tie between the image of the woman and what was happening in the background. Also to tie in with that theatre feel of having a shim come down, that sort of clear or almost translucent curtain that comes down when you go to a theatre show. So it sort of hides what's going on in the background. And while I really liked this, I found that there was a bit too much of a disconnect, because the image was slightly cloudy, because of obviously it had to be printed for through a computer. It has to have the grip on it. I wanted people to actually be able to open up and see what was happening, so open it up more like a book. So what I've done is changed my knife, used a really sharp knife, and I've gone in and cut the edges so I can use that as a flap. I'm going to use again the red liner tape to glue that down. I've got some thicker tape, that's what I was looking for there. So I knew I was going to have a really, really secure fastening to the box. While I was doing that, I came across a door handle knob thing that I've had from Seven Gypsies for years now, that I thought would be perfect to have on the side, that would encourage people to actually open it up. If you saw that sitting on the shelf as is, you probably wouldn't be encouraged to open it. You would think it was totally enclosed. So by having something on the edge that looks like you have to open it, will make it more interactive. And that's one of the beautiful things about assemblage art, is the fact that it can be really interactive. People can look it up, touch it, feel that 3D nature of it. So I'm just going over the metal piece to age it, putting down some of the black gesso, getting some of that gold paint again, just aging it up using my paintbrush. I think I get my fingers in here at some stage, because I can never not get my fingers into things. I think you saw me before just use the knob. It's actually got two brads on the back. I just pressed them up so I could work out where the hole was going to be. Because that box is very, very thick and very, very stable, it does actually take a little bit of pressing. I need to get my scissors in to actually really make a hole so the brads could go through. So I'm just going back in with my pen just to hide any bits and pieces that shouldn't really be there, any paint that's gone over. I'm going to use my hot glue gun again to glue this down, except I did it too quickly and it wasn't hot enough, so it dried straight away. So press it down really, really firmly, and then you've got the brads in the back that are also going to help adhere it, and just make sure they're really pressed down. And again, to hide those little bits of white that you can see, going back in with the paint just to hide it over, and try and make it as invisible as possible. Obviously you're still going to see it, but it just tries to make it as invisible as possible. So that's the finished bit. Apart from this, sorry, I did have those diamonds sitting there looking at me, and one of the songs I love in Moulin Rouge is the one, Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. But it was just a bit too gaudy. It just didn't quite work, particularly with so much gold in the front and gold and red. Having that silver come in just didn't quite work for me. So this is the final piece. So it was an amazing project to have. It's one of those things, again, I had a really clear vision for it, and sometimes you can have a really clear vision for something and it doesn't come together. For this, it did. It did exactly what I wanted it to, and I'm just so happy with it. Doing collage is my great love. I love putting together different bits and pieces in different ways, and doing assemblage art is just doing that 3D, and it just gives you that little bit of extra joy. So I do hope if you enjoyed this process that you have a go. It doesn't have to be this big or in depth, just do a tiny little thing, but have a go at doing something 3D. I'm sure you will love it. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was a long one, but I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you again in the future. Bye.